Good morning, everybody. Hello, and everyone is welcome to the second Pride in Nature event organised by Natural England. I'm Cath Tomlin, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Sustrans. Sustrans is the charity making it easier for people to walk and cycle. We connect people and places, create livable neighbourhoods, transform the school run and deliver a happier, healthier commute. Sustrans is on an EDI journey to strengthen the diversity of our organisation and to strengthen our culture of inclusion and to have greater impact in the work we deliver. We're also on a bit of a nature journey, exploring how best to ensure we are making space for nature and developing greener, more biodiverse, traffic-free paths on the cycle network. The linear geography of our greenways offers the potential to create exemplar habitats with spaces and routes for wildlife to both live and travel. So that's enough about Sustrans. I'm honoured to be chairing this year's event, having been on the panel last year. But just before we start, I'd like us all please to take a moment to reflect and send love to all of those affected by the situation in Ukraine, to the people of Ukraine and their friends and families around the world, including our colleagues and those in partner organisations. And also with those who found themselves caught up in this situation in any way, those who lived and worked in Ukraine or were students there. This includes people of colour, some of whom are facing additional challenge and discrimination in seeking help. Our thoughts are also with those in Russia who are protesting against the war and facing the consequences of that action and of the sanctions that are being imposed. And with those who are of Russian descent or Russian speakers elsewhere who oppose the war and are concerned that they will face abuse or discrimination because of the actions of the leadership of the Russian state. Thank you for that. So, the theme for today's event is Everyone's Welcome. And whilst last year we spoke about experiences of LGBTQ+ folk working in the natural environment sector, today's event is very much about how we work together to make people feel welcome in the natural environment. So I use the acronym LGBTQ+ to include the full range and spectrum of sexual orientations and gender identities. Other speakers today may use different acronyms throughout, but the message is the same: everyone is welcome. We want today's session to be a safe, inclusive and welcoming space. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers with a breadth of experience across the natural environment. We'll also be having a Q&A section to provide space for a bit of an interactive session, and I hope you've all found the Q&A panel. If you look for the icon at the top of the screen, that's the speech bubble with the question marks. That's how you get into it. Please do pop your questions in there as we go along. You can like each other's people questions and the most popular will float to the top, and that'll help us and me prioritise during that session. So I think that is plenty from me. We'll go on now to our first speaker. And our first speaker is Dan O'Neill. So Dan is a wildlife presenter, biologist and independent filmmaker. He has documented wildlife across the world, from endangered eagles in the Amazon and jaguars in the Philippines, and founded Wilderland, the UK's first touring wildlife film festival. He has talked openly about his experiences as a gay man in the naturalist filmmaking industry. And Dan will share his lived experience in the television and film industry to welcome us into the day. Over to you now, Dan.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I hope I'm off mute. Am I off mute? Because we had this slight issue earlier on. There we go. Yeah, no, I'm so happy to be able to talk at events like this. I think it's so important for our community to be able to come together because we are stronger when we are together. And I love our theme for today, of everyone being included, because I want to talk a bit about, I feel like a lot of what I went through and spoke about in the past was about, we need something, we need to make it work, we need to have more representation. And I actually think we're now moving into a world, especially in mine and Darwood's industry, within the BBC, of a massive push towards diversity and inclusion for loads of different marginalised groups, and it's really, really exciting. But I'll start a bit by talking about my journey. So I studied at school, and I loved biology, I loved chemistry, I loved maths, but I was really bad at all of them. And I had to work really, really hard to get the grades to go to university to study biology. I wasn't as naturally gifted as my peers. And I think that that's something really important to talk about, because we, especially in kind of like positions of like authority, or in higher positions in biological sciences, or even in presenting in TV, you assume that it's always the smartest people in the room that are getting to those positions, and it's actually not true at all. And I would say that a lot of the issues that I went through at school, through bullying, through some homophobia, they really pulled me down and made it much harder for me to focus on my work. So I think it's so great that we have stuff like this so we can bring people up. But I went to study zoology at university, and I was really, really lucky, because at university we had a fantastic lecturer called Professor Duncan Cameron, and he was the first really out and proud biologist that I'd ever met. I had grown up in Oxford. Sorry, I actually don't know how to turn that pinging sound off, but give me 1 second. And he was covered in tattoos, he had a mohawk, and he was really obsessed with fungi. And I was never particularly interested in plants. I was never particularly interested in fungi. I went to university and I chose zoology so I could get away from all things other than animals. But I became so interested in fungi and so interested in plants because I saw myself in that man. He was standing on the lectern at the front, talking from a really proud position of the person that I saw myself in. And when I was 14 years old, I would have killed to have somebody to look up to, like I was looking up to him at the age of 18, 19, 20, that I didn't have back then. And I think my whole life and my whole career trajectory would have been so much easier and so much more straightforward had I had those role models to look up to. And I think that's what's so important for us about diversity. And if you want to do wildlife filmmaking, if you're interested especially in presenting, there's just basically nobody from our community being spotlighted in those positions, especially in the UK. And it's really, really hard. But Duncan was someone, who gave me a really good sense of self. He was really engaged with the LGBT network at university. He kind of drew me away from the slight elements of shame that I'd had when I was younger, being surrounded by all boys in my family, pretty much except my mum, and gave me the idea that actually it's not just something that I was hiding. It was a community that I was ignoring, and that's for those were the first kind of days of realizing how exciting it was to be part of this community. And then fast forward on, and actually I'd had a really great time. I went to I worked around the world, had a couple of slightly dodgy situations related to people kind of figuring out who I was and my sexuality abroad, and then having to sort of like shoehorn in a marriage that I'd had at home or some kind of situation. But it wasn't until I'd gone into the presenting world, and it was back in 2019 when I went into a meeting in London with a big production company, and one of the heads of that meeting, I don't think that they believed themselves to be speaking out of turn or doing anything particularly bad, but they were doing this great new series, and the idea was to retrace the steps of Darwin, and they wanted to have a Darwin on the boat, and they were looking for their new Darwin, and they went in and they were all very excited, and I got so excited that I was like flapping my arms around. You can imagine, I was like, oh my God, I felt very safe in that room, because that was a room full of people I typically in my life had felt very safe with. There was a group of women, and there were some people that I believed to be queer in the room, and I felt quite safe there. But it wasn't until I got back and they called my agent and they said, he's quite a lot gayer than we expected. And that was the first time I'd actually ever really on the nose experienced something that I would now call a prejudice, because my sexuality is so overtly at work that I was like, oh my God, this is actually happening right now. It's happening. Oh my God. And I didn't think about it for months. The only thoughts I remembered at the time were thinking, God, why did I do that? Why did I go into that room and not act like an explorer, whatever the hell an explorer is? It took me quite a long time to realize it. And I'd gone to the Amazon back in 2021, and I was there for 3 months shooting a project. And I got back and I was trapped in that bloody hotel room aside Heathrow Airport. Couldn't escape the room, these 4 small walls. And it gave me a lot of time to think. And I was in there and I was thinking, that's not okay. And it's not okay that I let that slide. And it's not okay that I didn't talk about it. And actually, if I'm not going to do it, it's not only going to happen to somebody else, but nothing's ever going to change. So I wrote, I co-wrote an article with a writer, a journalist, and it went out in the Independent, and a lot of people read it, and it resonated quite a lot. I got a lot of messages from it, and that's kind of where my I would say, action really began for me, in speaking about this a lot more publicly, because I think it sometimes isn't necessarily what people's innate prejudices, but it's the prejudices of the world surrounding them that allow them to make decisions without thinking about what they are doing and what they're saying. And I think the people in that production company, if they looked at, I think that meeting, they would not stand for what they'd said then. And if they'd read that article, I think they were like, oh God, we're awful, because I don't think that they're bad people at all. And I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about our experiences, so that we can, and I don't want to say so that people can learn, but in a way I think it's so important to open those doors with some element of positivity sometimes, and open arms, so that people who maybe did make a mistake like that can learn from it. And I've since found that through speaking publicly about it, people are so much more open to me in those positions, and I think, yeah, it's so important. But moving on from that, I think what's really exciting is from those conversations, and conversations that other fantastic people, in just like everybody on this panel, are having, it's changing the situation. And in natural history, especially at the BBC, I'm just seeing so much representation being talked about. So many people are being given the platform. Darwood, I see absolutely everywhere, speaking and talking incredibly, and such eloquence and brilliance. And I'm so excited for the future of representation on screen and behind the camera in natural history. I think we're moving in such a powerful and incredible direction. And it's because of people like everyone here on this panel, and it's because of people talking about it. And I just want to kind of say that I think we're moving in such an exciting time where, as an LGBTQI plus person, there is so much more growing opportunity. And for the first time, I really feel like, we can confidently walk into so many more rooms than we've ever been able to walk in before, and we have so many more allies in those rooms than we ever have before, and I think that just creates such a feeling of excitement for our whole community, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you very much, guys. Cheers. I'm aware of the time, so I don't want to lead on too much, but if anyone has any questions or wants to hear more about specific things like jungle living, being trapped high up in the mountains in -20, 4,000 meters up, looking for snow leopards, I'll be here for the Q&A, so we can talk about how amazing yet incredibly suffering nurse as well. But yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Dan. That was great. I think that's a great offer as well in the Q&A to hear about snow leopards. I'm sure somebody might ask a question about your experiences around that. And I just pick up on something you said about really positive about representation increasing both in front of and behind the camera. I think most of us have probably seen that start to happen, and I totally agree with you. I'm feeling quite positive about how that looks. So I will now introduce our next speaker, and our next speaker is Dawn Hoskin. Dawn is a cultural heritage curator with the National Trust, and she's curatorial lead for their LGBTQ+ steering group. She's currently providing curatorial and collection support to Queer Britain, and is a steering group member of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network and a member of the Queer British Art Research Group. Dawn previously worked at the Victoria and Albert Museum in a variety of curatorial roles, and as co-chair of the LGBTQ+ working group, developed a range of research and array of LGBTQ+ focused programming. And Dawn is going to speak to us about hidden stories and gay gardens. Over to you, Dawn.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay there? Yeah. So yes, hello everyone. I'm really excited to be part of this because I remember really enjoying previous iterations of this. So I also feel slightly intimidated, but I'll crack on because I have quite a lot of stories that I'd like to share. So I'll also get in straight away that if anyone has any further questions or about any of the things I mentioned, do get in touch or raise them in the Q&A. So as mentioned, I've worked in lots of galleries, libraries and museums and been involved in various bits of research activity to connect to LGBTQ things for about 12 to 13 years. And now that's quite different working for the National Trust as a curator, because I'm working with a portfolio of properties in the Midlands and East of England. And now I can very pleased to say that the Peak District as a whole is now in my portfolio as a curator. So yes, today I'm going to be thinking in terms of representation along the lines of further exploring some of our histories and connections, both within the National Trust and beyond. I can't see the slideshow anymore, so is that visible to people watching? Can someone reassure me? Okay. So hopefully it's the slide with the flag on, yes. So without looking too hard, we can find places and objects and ideas and times that have celebrated many of our special places by members of LGBTQ+ community. So the flag here we put together in collaboration with our comms team. So it's a bit of a homage to the Progress Pride flag. And it represents aspects of properties that have links to queer culture and heritage. So we've got like a white page from Virginia Woolf's Orlando, or blue of the door of T. Lawrence's refuge at Clouds Hill, Dorset. Next slide, please. I'm just going to assume that they're up and people just jump in if it all. I can see it. Great. Sorry for that. So from a curatorial point of view, I'm always looking to expand and develop a lot of this work and the stories, and a lot of that is coming out of the 2017 National Public Programme, Prejudice and Pride, which, for those who aren't familiar with it, this was an ambitious and large-scale research-led year-long programme of LGBTQ+ heritage, marking the 50-year anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of same-sex acts. So yeah, as a quick flavour of things, there were various publications produced, a podcast hosted by none other than Claire Balding. We had multiple artists in residence undertaking new research, producing film installations. We also worked with the National Archives to recreate a 1930s queer club in London, and we worked with the National Portrait Gallery for an exhibition of works at Sissinghurst in Kent, Beta Sackville West and Harold Nicholson's home. And we had 12 key places that programmed new exhibitions and events, and visitor numbers were over 350,000. And for that, we worked with a partnership with the Research Centre of Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester. But I think what was really exciting was lots of partnerships with artists, so bringing a contemporary eye and creative look at these stories. And it also really introduced different ways of people not only thinking about organisation and places, but ways of approaching histories and people, and also considering who we are as staff, volunteers and members. I could talk all day about all the stuff that happened, but I'll recommend there's 2 publications that really go into things that happened and reflections on that and the experience of it. So there's Prejudice and Pride, Celebrating LGBTQ Heritage by Alison Oram and Matt Cook, and also LGBTQ Heritage and its Contemporary Implications, which was edited by Richard Sandell, Matt Smith and Rachel Lennon. Next slide, please. So one of the core resultant legacies of Prejudice and Pride was the creation and establishment of the LGBTQ+ steering group. We have many facets of what we do, but I guess our core purpose is that the network exists to provide opportunities for people that share similar identities, narratives, interests and passions to come together, be allies for each other and support each other within the workplace. So I don't want to focus too much on the operations of the steering group, but I'm more interested in looking at more of the connections to more of our outdoor spaces in the natural world, so in the past and today. But I was just going to include this slide which shows Exile at Kingston Lacey, which is part of Prejudice and Pride. So Kingston Lacey's owner, William John Banks, was sent into exile, essentially because of his sexual orientation. But here the installation used views out of windows and playing with that idea of urban and rural experiences and linking his story with ongoing persecution of LGBTQ people, with contemporary experience of those kind of forced to leave homes and move places and spaces because of their sexuality. And I chose it because that link between the outdoors and indoors is something that I'm really interested in, this breaking down the seeming like boundaries of the wall at our places. And linking up. And next slide, please. So just to quickly get in, Octavia Hill, who was one of the first 3 founders of the National Trust, which we were set up to preserve places of historic interest or natural beauty for the enjoyment of the British public. She's a woman who had very intense relationships with other women, but she was at heart a social reformer, and her main concern was welfare of inhabitants of cities. And one of her main concerns was the availability of open spaces and access to the natural world for less well-off people. So she did really great campaigning about against development on existing suburban woodlands and things. So it's this kind of, I guess I'm really interested in that, trying to encourage all of our places to be considered more holistically and less of a divide between the outdoors and the indoors. And alongside of this, I think that that idea of gardens and outdoor spaces representing people's biography, I think also works for the outdoors as well. I was just going to mention here, I've got a bit of a slow burn, or like I might say seedling research project that I've been working on, which I've been dubbing Gay Gardens in slight homage to the wonderful Maisel Brothers film. So I'm really open to hearing if other people have connections and stories that they'd like to share. So next slide, please. And if we start outside the boundary of the garden, some of you might be familiar with Edward Carpenter already. He's one of my heroes, if only for making socks and sandals looking amazing there. He was one of the founders of the Labour movement, poet and philosopher, and he built a house in Millthorpe, in a little hamlet on the edge of the Peak District. And he used this as a model for a new way of living with nature and the natural world. And this was a time when male homosexual acts were illegal, but Carpenter lived pretty openly with his partner George Merrill there. And their home in the Peak District became this kind of refuge and almost a place of pilgrimage for others kind of wanting to break out of the constrictions of Victorian society. So you had the writer E.M. Forster and William Morrison Siegfried Sassoon were all visitors there. And I think Carpenter's interest because he was very much about believed that future society must change hearts as well as heads, and he was promoting very much a gentler alternative to this idea of an alienated industrial way of living. And he also advocated free love, vegetarianism and nudism, and introduced sandals big time. So all quite radical in that way. One what's interesting as well, connecting the outdoors and indoors again, is lots of his books can be found across the libraries of the National Trust, particularly his book The Intermediate Sex, which at Vita Sackville West's copy at Sissinghurst, she's actually added her own title to the cover, so she's retitled it Middlesex. And I'm quite interested in this idea of people making it's not quite a pilgrimage, but a journey to meet and socialise with key queer figures in more rural areas. And it also reminds me of people travelling to visit the ladies of Llangollen, which, next slide please, who were two rather upper class Irish women who whose relationships they kind of scandalised but also fascinated their contemporaries. They moved to a small Gothic house in Llangollen, North Wales in 1780. And their idea was this escaping of conventional kind of social pressures. But again, lots of distinguished visitors called upon them, fascinated by their romantic link and their ideals. So Shelley, Byron, Wellington and Wordsworth, and also Anne Lister was particularly curious, so she paid them a visit. They were great walkers and spent long days exploring the surrounding hills, and lots of poems of very varying quality were written about them, and often is linking this idea of romantic, picturesque ideas of the rural living and the natural world. And again, I'm really interested in thinking of experience of kind of growing up and living as LGBTQ people in more rural areas today, and this is something within the Trust we're putting a bit more focus on thinking what our role might be, what opportunities to play a positive role in supporting that or recognising different needs, and also trying to open up more thoughts and challenging those kind of assumptions around queer countryside experiences and that a notion that LGBTQ plus people only exist in cities, or you develop from a caterpillar into like a butterfly that heads straight for Soho and things like that. So next slide please. And I think as well, when thinking about this in the city and rural and ideas of nature and the natural world and like the real world, there's lots of interesting contradictions, which I'm trying to think of not as something to hold us back, but something that's fun to explore, because of course the natural world is around us, but often there's lots of contradictions in whether it's like a wilderness versus like a created and constructed wilderness. And then going back to the idea of like rural experiences, that it can be, one place can be both a sanctuary, but also almost like a kind of a prison or a place of restriction for people. And within city spaces, we often see these kind of man-made gardens used for the people. And here we've got Vauxhall Gardens, which in the 18th century was it was the pleasure gardens. So very much this constructed place, but where I could talk forever on with Vauxhall Gardens, so I'll just say that there's lots of queer activity happening within these spaces, and that they were places where people would flock to go because lots of the avenues of trees and bushes, different types of lighting allowed you different kind of leeways and things. And I'm interested to see in the early kind of turn of the 20th century, we start to see terms used for gay men, including evening botanists and horticultural lads. So there's these kind of threads of connection that run through. Next slide, please. And sticking with this idea of the kind of constructed nature and natural world, couldn't go by without mentioning Anne Lister, who actually I've already previously mentioned her, but so she created an area of parkland within the view of Shibden Hall, and this was kind of following the general romantic style. So she has her wilderness garden, and there's a moss-roofed hut in the gardens that I know there's records of. That's where she chose to woo Anne Walker, who was an heiress from a neighbouring estate that she was after. So it's these kind of semi-natural, semi-artificial spaces where people are kind of choosing to kind of woo and become like a theatre backdrop for lots of these relations. Next slide, please. And thinking about the ideas of refuge, just quickly mention there's Bucks Mills in Bidford, which is the studio and summer residence of painters Judith Ackland and Rosetta Edwards. And they used it from the 20s until Judith's death in 1971. And it's an amazing place to be. It's tiny, but the contents are pretty much the same as they were left in 1971. And it now hosts quite a few kind of artist retreat and residencies. Next slide, please. So I'm whizzing through these just because I wanted to get in a range of things. So again, what I've realised, it might sound like small connections or even potentially grasping at straws, but I've realised that I kind of get quite an emotional response to some of the stories that we find. So on the left, we have a picture of Clumber Park in Nottinghamshire. And I learnt just recently that Oscar Wilde stayed at the house there a couple of times. And rather lovely, I found this letter that he wrote to the author E. Nesbit, talking about, she'd sent some of her poetry to him to read. And he replies, I've been turning over the leaves, tasting as one tastes wine, and I'm fascinated by the sonnets, but I'm keeping the book as a whole for study in the Clumber Woods next week. The last envoy seems a really beautiful piece of work. You see, I'm getting to know you petal by petal. I just thought that was like, immediately when I'm next at Clumber, I'm going to be thinking of that and that idea of a presence in the outdoor landscape more. And on the right, we have the Chevalier Dion, a French spy, diplomat, soldier, who lived part of their life with gender appearance of male and then later female. Again, could talk all day about them, but when I discovered that Staunton Harold, where the National Trust look after the chapel there, they went up to Staunton Harold Estate as a refuge from when they were being harassed in London, with bets being placed on their gender identity. So again, a brief ephemeral thing, but that can really kind of bring something to when you experience the space. And then next slide, please. And I couldn't go through without mentioning gardens, and of course Sissinghurst, perhaps the most famous, I don't know, would we call it gay queer garden? And I think this is one where you can really see different partnerships and relationships play out. I've been to a number of different talks. I think this is something that's just increasing and people talking and getting interested in sharing. So I'm not going to touch on it for very long, but I really enjoyed, Virginia Woolf had this wonderful description of Vita there, relating her to the Lady Chatterley's lover. So her appearance in the garden always said, well, you're always simultaneously both of them. The upper half is Lady Chatterley and the bottom half the appearance of her lover, which I really liked. So next slide, please. And a place and people that Vita had friendships with were Cedric, the artist, art teacher and plantsman, Cedric Morris, who is here with his partner Arthur Let Haynes. And this is their house in Benton End in Suffolk, which there's a lot more information out there, and I'm so glad that there's so much work being done to the garden and to eventually open it up to the public. But Benton End was really like this kind of communal, domestic and artistic space, welcoming in like art students and other people. And so Vita Sackville West was there, Benjamin Britten, Peter Pears, Maggie Hambling. So amongst all the names, you can always pick out some good LGBTQ names amongst them. And they described as creating an atmosphere which was robust and coarse and exquisite and tentative, faintly dangerous. So they'd met on Armistice Night and essentially stayed together forever after. And Cedric Morris is perhaps mostly associated with irises and also poppies. And I can't believe I forgot to put on an example of his paintings, but there's a lot out there, and the Garden Museum have some really good content. And what I found interesting was Cedric described that he saw a kind of life in the plant world that was oddly parallel to the world of humans, and he was amused by the erotic analogies. And his interest was also not just about the beauty of the flower, but their apprehension and how they found their identity amongst other flowers. So there's lots of these kind of ways of thinking and approaching the world of gardening. So Cedric propagated lots of various irises, but now is the time of year that there is a snowdrop Cedric Morris. So that's Galanthus season, if you keep an eye out for that. And just linking back again, there's Sarah Cuckoo as head gardener at Sissinghurst. She set about identifying all the registered cultivars, which is about 90 that Cedric Morris produced, which includes Iris Berenice Abbott, which is named after a lesbian American photographer. So that takes you off into a whole new world of could you have a garden full of flowers named after queer people? Next slide, please. And just to quickly demonstrate that thing of the idea of flowers as symbolism or flowers as a potential for a portrait via flowers, this kind of semi-public connotations of queerness. So here's the artist Gluck, who was in a relationship with Constance Spry, the society florist, and they would often paint the arrangements she did, but once you start to learn more about them and their relationship, you can read a lot more into what's being said in what initially might appear as a vase of flowers. Again, lots more people are drawing attention to that at the moment, so I'd encourage people to look more into that. And then next slide, please. And then, of course, can talk without the queer language of flowers, so that kind of saying it with flowers. Just a few quick examples here. There's the green carnation, which came to symbolise homosexuality after Oscar Wilde asked his friends to wear them in 1892. And there's some interesting kind of symbolism about the natural, unnatural kind of colours and playing with a bit of theatricality. And buttercups, daisies, and of course the pansy will come to be used as terms for mainly for gay men, which I think then generalised as that horticultural lad. In 1920s New York, the club scene, the Flower Pot and the Pansy Club were particularly famous queer clubs. And on the bottom left, there is an example of the work of Paul Harfleet that runs the Pansy Project, who plants pansies at sites of homophobic and transphobic abuse, which creates this really powerful kind of symbolic gesture, and also that idea of plants surviving often in urban landscapes. And then just to quickly say, I was so glad to see Queer Botany doing work with Chelsea Physic Garden, highlighting some of these kind of queer links with the world of plants. And I suspect I might have run over my time there, so I might leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, wow, that was a whistle-stop tour, and I don't know about others, but I'm certainly inspired to get out to my nearest gay garden, whether it's a National Trust property or not. So thank you for those. It's time for our first break of this morning, and if I could ask everyone to be back by 10:10, be ready to start with our next speaker. That would be awesome. Thank you ever so much. And I'm live, and we're back. I was trying my best BBC there, but that didn't work. Welcome back after the break, everybody. I hope you had a quick whatever you needed to do, fluid, some in, some out. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Dawood Qureshi. And Darwood is a queer writer, freelance journalist, TV researcher at BBC Natural History Unit. They're a wildlife filmmaker, ambassador for the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, engagement officer for the youth-led nature organisation A Focus on Nature, an activist, a marine biology graduate and a speaker presenter. Darwood is going to talk about the need for our voices to be heard, queer diversity in conservation and nature. Over to you, please.
Hello, I think everyone can hear me. Every time I go to unmute myself, then the screen jumps away, so that's really annoying. But yes, and I can see my presentation, so everything is fine. Yeah, hello everyone, I'm Dawood Qureshi, and first of all, I just want to say thank you to Dawn, because that was absolutely amazing. I really enjoy it. I did not know there were that many queer sort of icons in the natural history world, and I didn't know that there was that much history connected to it, and I think that feels amazing for us as a community to feel that connection and to also justify it to a lot of people, because we shouldn't need to, but every so often people come along and be quite prejudiced, and it's good that we've got that backlog of information to show that we've always been here and we're always going to be here. So I really love that, and also thank you to Dan for saying my name way too many times. But yes, so this is my presentation on basically my experiences. So if we go to the first slide. Okay, so who am I? So I've been introduced with way too many titles. I keep keep on doing things, and I haven't got any time to sleep. But yeah, so I am first and foremost, I think, a storyteller and a writer. Those are the things that have really been core to everything that I've done. I love to tell stories. I love to change perspectives through those stories, and I love to build narratives. I think that's the most important and probably one of the most powerful ways in which you can change anyone's mind about anything is by creating a story around it. And that can be by so many different ways. You know, on social media today, there are so many different ways of telling stories. There are so many different ways of telling stories through film, and through books. And for me, I think the best way I've found I can tell stories is as a writer. And I'm really happy that I've managed to do freelance journalism since I was at uni. And even before that, when I used to blog about things when I was about 9, and about the conservation in my garden and about nature that I just saw around me. And that has led to where I am now as a freelance journalist who not only writes about conservation, biology and natural history, but also about diversity in terms of my experiences as a queer person of colour and a trans person who is in the natural history industry. It's also led to, amazingly, a dream job, which is as a TV researcher at BBC Natural History Unit. I think for me, I grew up watching David Attenborough documentaries, and that's all I watched. I grew up watching wildlife documentaries and films. I grew up watching Steve Vauxhall and Deadly 60. I grew up watching so many different things that led to me loving film. And even just fictional movies that included nature and natural history. I saw how that influenced people's idea of nature and natural history. The only issue that I have is that I could not see myself at all in any of the things that I watched. And I never really realized how much of an effect that had on me until I did go to university and studied marine biology. And I really enjoyed it, but I started to feel that I was very much out of place in this world. And I really started to feel that I couldn't do what I wanted to do and still express myself as I wanted to, because I think an integral part of a person is how they express themselves and how we confirm our identities. And for me, that was being a bit more loud, that was wearing certain clothing, that was trying to talk about issues that pertained to my sexuality. I wanted to talk about those things, but I didn't feel that in the world of logic and stats and science that I could really marry up those two aspects of myself. And that made me feel like I really needed to leave. And this, I think, is a fundamental issue with the STEM and natural history industry, is that a lot of the time it's viewed as a very logical scientific arena, when in fact the best ecologists that I've ever met, and the best conservationists, and the best wildlife people, Tan included, are the most passionate, incredible people who put 110% of passion into their work. And they have logic too, but it doesn't need to be the first and foremost thing, because passion really drives our progress, especially in this subject. So I think for me, that is one of the things that I like to talk about a lot, is the fact that you should be passionate. You should be in touch and reflect on yourself in terms of your identity and your expression, because that will make you a better scientist and make you a better person in the natural history industry. In terms of some of the other small things that I do, so I am an ambassador for bumblebees, and that's something that's really made me quite happy, because these are animals that I see as being a very integral part of our ecosystem, and I've been interested in them for a very, very long time. And I love talking about pollinators. I love talking about insects. I have often been told to be quiet because I talk way too much about bugs. And I just love them. And it's amazing that someone like me, who I could never see when I was growing up, being in this industry and talking about insects of all creatures, is speaking about this on platforms to so many different people. And at the bottom here, I have something which says queer, non-binary, trans, and a person of colour, South Asian, and also Muslim. So all of these different aspects of my identity, I never see them in this industry at all. And whilst I'm extremely happy that I'm getting to speak about my views, my interests, and my passions in nature as someone who is these identities, and also speaking about them in depth, it also makes me quite sad that I'm the only one, and that there aren't anyone else. You know, there's no one else out there really, but there is, and I've met them and I've seen them. But it does get a bit worrying when you're the only person on stage, because unfortunately it can lead to something called tokenism and individualism, where you are the only person who seems to have all the answers. And that happens a lot to queer people, especially when they're in industries where they're not normally seen, because if you are a minority in a group that finds you a bit weird, they'll often question. So and often you are expected to have all the answers. Next slide, please. So this is just, I think, a slide that kind of talks more about the fact that even though so as a queer person, I like to talk about, and a person of colour, I like to talk about diversity. I like to talk about the usefulness of having someone who looks like yourself and who has similar experiences to you on any sort of front page of anything, and having someone like that in media, and having someone like that who you can also look to and think, that will be easier for me to get to that place, because I can see that someone like me is over there already. And even as someone who's slightly more known now as a journalist and a speaker, I can then reach down to other people and say, this is what you can do. This is some advice that I've had from other people, and offer it in a way that I can curate to people like me. But I would also like to talk about the fact that as people, we are so many different things, and there's so many different amazing things that we can be interested in. And it's fascinating to me sometimes that people will come up to me and ask me about my experiences solely as a person of colour or a trans person, and will not want to talk about the fact that I love writing fiction. I love stories about loads of different worlds. I love films, I love movies. My favourite movies are Jurassic Park. You know, I love talking about dinosaurs and paleontology. I love whales, insects, and all of these different things that make people. I think it's very useful to express those whenever you're talking about diversity, and whenever you're talking about intersectionality and the issues that are affecting us around the globe, because this idea of linking everything together means that we then all feel that we can actually relate to these issues. And it means that there are issues that are going on now across the planet, and you may not feel as if you are connected to those issues or you have to care about them. But really, when we look to the root of these issues, and we look to what we're all interested in and what we're all passionate about and what affects all of us, we actually realize that we're all completely and utterly connected. And that's why we should be caring about all of these things. Next slide. So why is this a conversation? And I think that is unfortunately quite easily shown by the obstacles and challenges that I have faced, and as people here have faced in the industry. So I've talked already about my expression and my want to express myself as a queer person, to wear certain clothing, to wear makeup when I was assigned male at birth. And unfortunately, I was stopped from doing a lot of the things that I loved when I grew up in a strict Muslim household. And I also think that pertains to nature, because as a person of colour who grew up in a very urban area, I didn't grow up with a garden or any reserves nearby. I grew up in a flat above a shop. I didn't have any access to green spaces, really. I could go to them every so often, and we did travel to them, but it was very far away and it was harder for me to get to them. And so most of the love that I have for nature comes from my love of insects and plants that I found in urban areas, and lots of different urban wildlife, which I'm really passionate about now. But a lot of the time when I saw on TV was these amazing, fascinating worlds like the Amazon rainforest, and they were being shown to me, and I felt a great disconnection because they weren't things that I could see ultimately that I could ever get to. So I think that links into me being a person of colour, that links into my expression, and these fundamentally also link into my queerness, and the fact that what I did after that, it seemed to me, was add an extra layer of difficulty. And I would put that in quotations because it isn't difficulty, but it is made difficult when the world around you is so built in this heteronormative, very, very interesting fashion that means you have to conform to a certain ideology in order to fit in. And for me, that very much, that made me stick out, and that made me feel as if, like I've said before, that I couldn't fit in these worlds. And I think one of the issues that I need to talk about more, and that I have talked about a bit, is the fact that if you are a trans person in this community, and if you are a queer person in this natural history sort of arena, you very much belong, because the idea of being queer is that you celebrate that difference, you celebrate that spectrum of life, you celebrate that amazing flexibility that ecology has to be as it is now, whereupon we understood it as something different so long ago. And I think for me, that is so intertwined with the idea of queerness and nature that it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that, you know, we don't belong here, because we ultimately almost belong here more than anyone else. And I think to bring it down a bit, to talk about the discrimination and the bias that sometimes happens in these areas. So as a trans person of colour, I have faced discrimination when people have talked to me differently, have said things to me that I didn't belong in certain areas, have said to me that I only got certain jobs, for example, at the BBC Natural History Unit because I was a diversity quota filler, and various different things that have been said to me that unfortunately meant that, again, I didn't feel as if I belonged in these areas. And I'm quite happy and excited to see the progress that the BBC Natural History Unit is making, but we have a very long way to go. And I think at the bottom here we have something that I like to talk about a lot, which is the fact that we are a team and we are a support system. Alongside here, there are a lot of kind of flags and logos, and these are things that I believe in. These are things that I believe I should support as someone who understands that there are issues that I'm not directly connected to, but ultimately I am connected to by the fact that I am a human being. And the fact that we are a support system and we are people who understand each other should very much come into this. Next slide, please. So this is just, I'm just going to go over this rather quickly. I don't know if I'm running out of time because I stupidly don't time anything. But what can you do as people? I think this is a very interesting slide, because oftentimes as well, we talk about tokenism. We talk about the fact that too many people come to one person. And that is one of the points here, which is try not to isolate one person as your main point of information. Try not to just talk to one person about the issues that are happening in the world with trans people, about the laws and policies that are affecting our healthcare, about the laws and policies that are affecting queer people and queer people of colour. Try to find out information on your own, and if you are unsure of things, there are lots of people who are available, and perhaps you can reach out to people like me and get links for those people. But oftentimes I feel quite drained and quite tired if people are talking to just me about things. I know a lot of queer people share that sentiment. In terms of recognising your own privilege, I have privilege, everyone has a level of privilege, and it's very useful to understand where you stand in terms of the things that you already have and the things that you can do and the ways that you can express yourself, because what that means is you're allowing yourself to look down on the rest of the world and see where in this world are people who can't do these things, where in this world are people who at the moment or in the future or in the past or at any point in time they couldn't express themselves as they wanted to in this industry. And I think in this incredible industry that we have, where it's so fascinating to look at all of the different aspects of wildlife and conservation and how different things link together, I think it's so incredibly important to recognize how privileged sometimes you are to be able to look at these things and learn about them. Because the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people who, if they were given the tools and the chance, they would be absolutely amazing in these jobs. They would be incredible, but they aren't given the tools and the chances. So it's not really a case of people not being interested. It's more of a case of people not having the tools yet to be interested. Next slide, please. So I think most importantly, the fact that I'm a storyteller and I've kept that at the heart of myself as what has kept me going in this industry when I felt like I couldn't go anywhere, or I felt like I was being pushed away or pushed out of this industry that I love so much. And I think that very much is something that everyone needs to think about, especially when they're in the natural history industry and they're feeling as if they're not part of it because they're queer. Because the fact of the matter is, as I've said before, everyone belongs here, but most importantly, queer people, with our understanding of change and our understanding of all of these different aspects and the struggles that we face along the way, it's incredibly paramount that you understand that you belong in this industry. And the fact that we are opening up this industry to new and fresh perspectives, that's going to help us progress more than anything we've ever done before. And lastly, my penultimate slide, which is be yourself, because really I would very much encourage everyone to come into this industry, and please be yourself, because it's helped this industry progress more than ever before. And there are some socials if you actually want to hear me talk more, because I've talked loads.
That was amazing, Dawood. Thank you ever so much. And I think we ended on a very uplifting note, you know, in terms of representation matters at the start when you couldn't see yourself. But reaching out and strength in numbers. I think most of us have probably all been there where we feel like we're the ones who have to speak, who have to say. So I'm sure we'll come on to some of that in the Q&A later. But time now for our next speaker, and we've got Kim Matthews from the Rspb. So Kim is a digital campaigner, EDI champion, and Rspb Starlings LGBTQIA+ network co-chair. Kim has worked at the Rspb since 2009, first in memberships, then in campaigns team, where she worked to empower supporters to take action to save nature. Kim has a degree in zoology and enjoyed a varied career from riding instructor and shepherd through to field researcher on primates in Thailand and Costa Rica. I'm sure there's some questions about those for later as well. So Kim is going to talk about bringing pride back to the Rspb. Over to you, Kim.
Hello, I think there is a red box about me, so I think I'm live. Hi everyone, I'm Kim Matthews. My pronouns are she, her. I'm still very daunted by following Darwood, because everything that they said cuts straight to my heart. For most of my life, all I've wanted to do is not campaign for nature, but save nature on the front line, and I ended up in campaigns. And whilst I still am desperately passionate about saving nature, over my journey at the Rspb, particularly through the Rspb Starlings and becoming disabled, has led me to now be much more passionate about helping the people who want to save nature. So making sure that we do have an inclusive, diverse community, you know, all fighting to save nature. In terms of many hats, I have often describe myself at work now as a fat, female, menopausal, queer, disabled person. So, you know, we have the gamut. Yes, RSPB started from women campaigning, as I'm sure many of you know, but it wasn't until one person put an article on the intranet saying, does anybody want to start an LGBT group, that things really kicked off for the RSPB. Next slide, please. So how it all began, as I said, it began with one Starling. Next slide, please. So Rhea Chris was a parliamentary officer in Scotland, and as I said, she put out a call on the intranet for everyone interested in being part of an LGBT group. She left RSPB to join Scottish Parliament in 2017, but once a Starling, always a Starling is our motto. The group has been fully supported by the E&D department. When I say department, at that time it was only one person, right from the very beginning, which is really good. First we had a bit of an uninspiring name. We were just the RSPB LGBTI network. We had our first meetings in January with staff dialing in from across the offices around the UK. And by May we had changed our name to the RSPB Starlings. After a lot of deliberation, I have to say, but one thing we wanted to do was not exclude people by having I mean, now, to be honest, we do tend to keep the letters in the title, but back then we didn't want people to feel that they had to out themselves in order to join the network. We didn't want people to feel like they had to fit in one of the categories alongside those letters. So we became the RSPB Starlings because they speak in many voices and gather in large numbers. We were too late in 2017 to go to Pride, but it was something that we were very passionate about right from the beginning. So 2018 was our big moment. We launched a limited edition Pim Badge, which I am wearing mine right here. We planned our first Pride attendances at Pride in London and Brighton Pride. Next slide, please. And we put a call out to our design colleagues to come up with something for us for Pride. And I'll be honest, I was really nervous because I wasn't sure whether they would get what we were trying to do. But they came up with this, which is Love Your Nature, and had the Starlings perching on it. And we were just blown away that somebody, you know, from outside our community was so fully on board with what we were trying to do that they came up with this amazing logo. And there was text around it as well, all about how we should love our natures. So we went off to Pride 2019. There was more Prides, and this time we invited RSPB members along for the first time. 2020, well, you know, let's face it, 2020 and 2021 were pretty shit years. It's not looking so great so far this year either in many ways, but we didn't do any Prides in person, obviously, but we did all get together online and watch the Global Pride together, and we had such a party. It was brilliant. Last year, we finally created a committee. We have a constitution, and we held our first AGM. Next slide, please. And this is just to run through what we do. So as a network, we foster a positive, safe and understanding working and volunteering environment for LGBTQIA+ colleagues. We advocate for greater equality, diversity and inclusion at the RSPB, in particular for the LGBTQIA+ community, but obviously for inclusion and diversity in general. We promote the voices of the LGBTQIA+ community in the RSPB. We engage with allies in all of our activities, and we help to inform RSPB policy that relates to LGBTQIA+ issues. And we've been really fortunate to network with other LGBT groups across the sector. Next slide, please. But of course, you don't get anywhere without a few bumps in the road. So before I get on to our successes, I thought I'd cover some of the challenges that we faced. Next slide, please. I think some of these will perhaps not be surprising, particularly for anybody working in big organisations. Certainly to start with, people really didn't see the relevance or importance of an affinity group or Pride attendance As far as they were concerned, if it wasn't about sort of bird bums on nests, what was the relevance of it? What was the importance of it? And until we won over senior staff, it was really hard to get money for banners and flags. It helped that a regional director was a Starlings member, and she actually used some of her budget to get everything going. I mean, we had we've used a tiny amount of money in considering, you know, how much money a big organisation potentially has to wield. Our costs have been tiny in comparison to the impact that we've had. Obviously, we all work off the side of our desks, literally everybody, and that goes for every single affinity group, every EDI champion. It's all done off the side of desks. And we found that there's been a very fluctuating membership over the years as well. So there's always seems to be a core of people that sort of keep it going and are very committed to it. But other people sort of come in and they go, and that's absolutely fine, because, you know, we never wanted it to be that, you know, you had to come to meetings. But I think sometimes it's because people are not being given the space in order to be able to attend meetings like ours. We're hoping that having the committee and people voted in at our AGM every year will help to ensure that the group remains sustainable going forwards. Another big problem, and I mean it's remained a problem right from the very beginning, was access for volunteers, because we all strongly believe that the volunteers at the organisation, you know, who give so much of their time and are responsible for so much of the work that the RSPB does, that they should get the same opportunities for engagement and support that staff do. But unfortunately, it isn't possible to have an email distribution list unless you have an RSPB email. We've now found a way around it, but it has taken this long. So it's taken 5 years to find a solution for this before we could get volunteers involved. The next one, the misuse of imagery. Well, there's quite a big thing about that actually, and I'm hoping that it might come up in the Q&A, because I'd love to hear from other people. But we have found that quite often our images of us at Pride, which are of course very colourful, they tend to get used a lot, and they will get used out of context. They can be mislabeled. And occasionally, at least how it has felt to us, is that they've been used in a way that gives the impression, potentially to outside people, that the organisation is further along its diversity and inclusion journey than it actually is. We believe most of this is unintentional, as far as we're aware, and it's just a case of somebody somewhere is putting something together. They see a really colourful, nice image which is full of diversity, and they want to use it, and we can completely understand why. But that said, how do we use imagery? This comes back to what Darwood was saying. How do we use imagery, not just of the LGBT community, but other protected characteristics, without looking tokenistic, when we know that visibility of it is so important? It's important for other people to see an organisation embracing diversity and inclusion. So that's my question to throw out, that hopefully we can come to in the Q&A, is how do we do this? Because if organisations don't use diverse imagery, then they never change. They look exactly the same. So anyway, yeah, we find that that's been a really big thing. There have been some transphobic and homophobic responses from supporters, thankfully in very small numbers, literally only a handful, and that has come from the more we have been visible, I suppose, and we have put articles out in like the magazine and on social media. And in this case, we worked with the EDI and the head of comms to come up with an official response to hate mail. Another issue we had very early on was the social media's troll policy, which was basically to ignore trolls, which meant that a post would go out about us being at Pride, somebody would post something really hateful, and it would just be left there unaddressed, which to us felt like we were being hung out to dry a little bit. And what we really wanted to see was the organisation calling it out, you know, being proud of its diverse staff and standing by us. You know, this has since changed, and you know, it is a lot better. But actually, here's another thing to potentially discuss in the Q&A. when yesterday the Rspb put a post on Instagram promoting this event, the hate speech underneath it was so bad that it breached Insta policy and they had to shut the comments down. So, you know, this is not a small thing, the way that the wider world face this. And yeah, it's really perhaps something to talk about. But yeah, so, and last of all, but something that is continuing to this day is a lack of join up across the organisation. And I suspect this isn't just around LGBT issues, probably many things, but it'll be things like stuff will be happening and people don't think to come and ask us. So a bit like the imagery, actually, because if they asked us if this was appropriate context, then we could obviously help them. But for example, there'll be discussions by comms teams on awareness dates, LGBT awareness dates, and they don't come and ask us if we're doing anything. Face-to-face teams could be planning for membership recruitment at local prides, but again, don't link up with us. And very recently, some insight that was not started by Rspb, but Rspb were part of, was around LGBT audiences, and the Starlings first heard about it when it was presented to the rest of the organisation. So, and it felt like, and there were all the people in the chat at the time going, oh, what can we do about this? What can we do about this? And I'm like, well, you know, you've got the Starlings, you've got people within your organisation who are part of the LGBT community. And it was like tumbleweed, like just, yeah. Anyway, so those are some of our challenges, but thankfully we have managed to have a lot of success. So next slide, please. And I just have to stop on this one because the flags were drawn by Ali Artistry, Ali Laura Artistry, and her details are on the very final slide. But I just love this one so much with all of the different flags that I had to get it into the talk. So next slide, please. So this is the stuff that we have done. We've been to 7 prides across the UK so far, London twice, we've been to Brighton, Birmingham twice, Perthshire and Glasgow. We have always tried to sort of organise a couple of big prides centrally, and then we support regional offices to get involved with their prides as well. So we will send them the banners, the flags, you know, whatever they need to get involved. When we go to Pride, we are marching for LGBT staff, volunteers and supporters, obviously, but also in solidarity with the 33 BirdLife partners where it is still illegal to be gay. And obviously Rspb is a key part of BirdLife. We went to the virtual Pride gathering during the pandemic. Everybody is always invited to our Pride, staff, volunteers, allies, family members. Obviously, the LGBT community is given priority where wristbands are limited. And Rspb members, as I said before, were invited in 2019 and several joined us. We've partnered up with the Gay Birders Club both times. We went to Pride in London and the crowd's response was absolutely phenomenal. Honestly, I can't tell you. You could see their surprise and delight when they saw that the banner was coming, and we were often followed by chants of birds, 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 or gay birds. And the attendee response was also amazing. It felt like we fostered a sense of community, really making a difference. Our Pim Badges were launched in 2018, but so far have raised up to £41,500 to help nature, and literally they started off as a limited edition. They only made 2,000, but the demand for them was so much. Internal awareness is really improving. We've got more people comfortable being out at work. We're helping to push the EDI agenda forward. We're the most developed group, now used as a model for other affinity groups. There's still a long way to go, but we hope that will come as the EDI work, which is now really going forwards, is going to be woven through everything that the organisation has done. And we want to be part of building a movement for inclusion through supporting and working with other organisations like National Trust, the Wildlife Trusts, Woodland Trust and Nature Scotland. Our social media teams are on board, although obviously they had a very distressing day yesterday fielding the stuff that was coming along. And we also provide advice and training for the rest of the organisation. If you'd like to whiz very quickly through the next slides, they literally just show us at Pride. I'd love to just get to, you can see we had an amazing time. This was all of us in London, and then the next one was at Birmingham last year. We've got members of our committee in this slide too. So we've got Ali and Anna. And next slide. I need to wrap this up very, very quickly. This was us in the magazine that goes out to 600,000 people, has a readership much more than that. And it was off on the back of this that we got like the handful of some really quite horrendous messages. Next slide, please. In fact, you can skip right to the last slide, which is the things we've got coming up next. Because of those transphobic incidents, this year we're going to be doing a trans awareness and inclusion campaign, because we are very much aware of the rise of gender critical ideology out in the wider world, and we're very worried about it. We're going to hold our very own Pride Month, and as part of that we're hoping that we can reach out to LGBT support groups and link them up with nearby reserves. We've got the new Equality, Diversity and Inclusion programme and working groups, and we're hoping to go back to Pride in person, and maybe even some new Pim badges with all of the flags and colours. And I'm going to wrap it up there. There was nothing more. If you can just briefly show the last slide, just to show that, you know, we are giving nature a home together. And there's the details for Ali Laura Artistry as well, who gave us so much wonderful art for this. And thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Kim, for that. And I think there's some really interesting stuff about the challenges as well as the successes. Always like to focus on the positives. But I guess if anyone wants to connect with Kim about work that their organisation's LGBTQ+ network might have done, there's a great opportunity. Straight on to our next speaker, and we're running slightly over, but I want to give Caroline plenty of time and space for theirs. Caroline is a nature artist and science communicator. And if you're slightly younger than me or better on socials than I am, you might know that she's quite big. They're quite big on TikTok. Apologies. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Yes, so my name's Caroline Roper. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm here just to share some of my own experiences as a member of the LGBTQ+ community in nature, as an artist, and as a science communicator as well. So a little bit about me. First off, how do I fit into the community? I'm bisexual. I'm a bisexual person. I've known I was bisexual since I was very, very young. And you might have also picked up that I'm not cisgendered. I don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth. I've known I wasn't cis for a very, very long time, but I didn't have the right vocab to come out as non-binary until I was in my 20s already, so until the end of 2020. In terms of who I am on a day-to-day basis, I'm an artist. I use my art to combine my love of nature, specifically my love of frogs, with my queer identity, and use it to celebrate other identities in the community as well. It's a lot of frogs holding pride flags, so it's a little bit on the nose sometimes. Some of it's more subtle, and all of that is by design. I want everybody to celebrate being in the community in as safe a way as possible. I'm also a science communicator, especially on TikTok and also through a podcast. I've got 160,000 followers currently. Most of those people follow me for my science and conservation videos. Some follow me for my LGBTQ+ artwork. But thankfully, it's a platform where I've got a really, really supportive community. And it's a place where I can show other LGBTQ+ people that you can be non-binary and work in the field. So that's really, really amazing. I think I was invited here today to talk about those things, to talk about how openly queer I am online and how wonderful all of that is. But I also want to talk about being a student, because that's sort of the stepping stone into this sector, is being a student at university. I'm currently studying my master's in biodiversity conservation down at Bournemouth Uni. Through my university, I got a placement at a wonderful site called Hengistbury Head, where I'm helping to manage the site. And through that, I'm doing my dissertation on management and surveying of natterjack toads, which is an endangered toad here in the UK. So there's a lot of different things there that I do. And obviously, we're not the same person in every aspect of our lives. We are different when we're at work, than when we're at home, with our friends, with our family, with our in-laws, all of those things. But as a non-binary person and as a queer person, and I think a lot of other queer people can relate to this, there are two very different versions of me that present in day-to-day life. And they are Out Caroline and Closeted Caroline. Out Caroline, especially online, is very, very proudly and sometimes quite loudly non-binary and bisexual. I'm very, very proud of myself and the community around me. That version of Caroline sometimes receives some meanness. I'm going to read some of the comments that I get on my videos on a regular basis. It's things like, "You're a they, them. Why do girls identify as anything but cis these days?" One person wrote, "Yeah, but oh, you're a they, them. That explains it." And my personal favorite was they, them. Yikes. So when you're a science communicator that's openly queer online, this sort of stuff is pretty normal. Being openly non-binary is usually the first thing people point out when they don't like what I'm saying. All of those comments were left on a video where I suggested that you shouldn't touch a fish that would sting you. And it got that sort of response. So that's sort of my online existence. In real life, there's a lot of closeted Caroline. I'm not out to most of my lecturers, to my supervisor, to most of my peers here at university, to my manager at my placement, and a lot of aspects of my life where I'm actively involved in nature, I'm not out yet. And that really sucks for me. It's not pleasant to be misgendered and not feel like I can talk about it. It's not what I want. And that's out of a fear of getting that negative reaction. I get it all of the time online. I don't want to have to deal with that in real life. I spend so much of my life defending my identity, and I don't want that in my personal life too. I want to add, we've got a lot of people here who are very, very open and out about being queer. It is completely valid to be afraid of coming out. And if you are somebody listening to this who's in the same situation, my heart goes out to you. And I often say online that you should not come out unless you're in a safe environment and unless you want to. That's okay. But here's the question that I get every now and then is, why does it matter? I work in nature. I work with frogs, and frogs don't understand and don't care about my identity. So why does it matter that I'm not out in my field? And to some extent, those people are right. Nature does not understand my gender identity. Frogs don't care. And for me, sometimes that's really reassuring. For me, nature is a place that I can just be myself. Especially during lockdown, when I first came out as non-binary, spending time in nature was really comforting. Because when I'm spending time doing things that I love, when I'm painting amphibians, when I'm working with moth surveys, things like that, I don't have to worry about coming out. And at the other end of it, I don't have to worry about defending my identity all of the time as well. Essentially, it's a space where I don't have to be those two different versions of Caroline. I can just be myself. That all applies when I'm working on my placement as well. Even though I'm not out to a lot of the people there, it doesn't matter that I've not entirely come out all of the time, because, you know, I don't need to be out to clean a toad pond out at the end of the day. But people do care. And people are what make that experience so special. Being able to be out in nature with other people is so wonderful. So, frogs and toads don't understand my gender, but people do. And I just wish that there was always, or I knew that there was an open and accepting place for me to come out regularly, so that I don't feel really awkward when people use she, her pronouns and I can't correct them. Thankfully, my two universities that I've been to, Keele University and Bournemouth University, have provided a lot of safe spaces where I can go and interact with other people in the LGBTQ+ community and nature. And I think providing spaces for those meetings to happen is really important. But I also wish that I could fully come out in the spaces that I don't. I've not had the privilege of having a lecturer who is LGBTQ+, who made me feel safe and accepting. I've not even had a lecturer ask what my pronouns are or share their own pronouns. People at work are constantly being trained on how to find moths and lizards and amphibians, but there's not a lot of talk on inclusivity training yet, especially when it comes to gender and sexual minorities. On top of that, nature is naturally very inclusive. people from every single walk of life enjoy nature, from the most queer to the most outright bigoted, unfortunately, which also adds an extra layer of being worried about coming out. And a love of nature is not limited by how open you are to people who are different to you. That also makes it the perfect backdrop for learning, because there are so many different people in this sector. Especially since nature is also naturally a little bit queer. I know we've talked about this before, but we have things like gay penguins and lionesses who grow manes, and toads who can trans their gender, who change their sex. And again, that's very, very comforting to me as somebody who works with nature, knowing that, you know, I'm a part of nature and it's totally normal to be who I am. And I see it every single day with all of the work that I do. And that's really, really incredible. But again, that provides a really wonderful backdrop for learning more about this community. All of those things combined is just a really, really wonderful place, and it highlights my point massively. So this talk hasn't been very, very long, but I want to sort of wrap this up by saying that I feel so, so lucky to have the platform that I have, especially on TikTok, where there are a lot of people there who see me. Hopefully I can be the person to some people who are, you know, worried about coming out and being in my field, and they can see me and say, hey, there are other people out there. And there are other people out there who are also worried about coming out. But that's still a thing. And I hate to leave this talk on such a bit of a downer note, but there is a lot more work that needs to be done. Things as simple as sharing what your pronouns are, like a lot of people have done today. That has been really, really wonderful. And I'm so grateful for everybody who's done that. But yeah, there is more work to be done, and we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. But just a little bit more work has to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And I'm going to start by apologising because given the content of your whole talk, and I misgendered you at the start. So I think it's an example of how we can all make mistakes and apologise and then move on. But perhaps that might be one of the questions that comes up in the Q&A. The Q&A is coming up after our break. I think if we stick to 10 minutes, that make awkwardness of the timing if we come back at 7 minutes past 11 or 8 minutes past 11. And don't forget to, we've got lots of questions already, but please don't forget to like the ones that are in there so that we have an idea of which ones are the most popular ones to ask. I'm just going to plug the QR code that will be on your screen through the break as well, because we're looking for feedback on this event so we can improve for the next time. So enough from me. Let's all get another break, and I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Someone had to point out that I was still muted. It had to be one of us that did it at some point today. Welcome back from the second break. We're now going to get into the Q&A. So we've got all of our panelists that have spoken. They're here for the Q&A. The way Teams works is that you'll see me, and then when I pass to people to answer a question, you'll see them. Unfortunately, we can't see everyone at the same time, I don't think. So I'm going to start with the questions that have been most liked. And the first one here, I think I'd like to go to Dan with this question, if that's okay. And the question is from Craig Dornan. What would you say was the core barrier preventing LGBTQ people engaging in nature, and how would we go about eroding it? So eroding the barriers rather than eroding nature. So Dan. And you're muted, Dan.
Unmute.
There we go.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. There's a slight lag on mine, so tell me if it goes back again, because I keep clicking it. What was the greatest barrier for LGBT people entering this space, did you say? Sorry, because yeah, you're breaking up slightly there.
Yeah, the core barrier preventing LGBTQ people engaging in nature.
That's a really difficult question, and I think it probably, and a really good question, I think it probably changes so much depending on, you know, the lived experience of whoever that person is, or where their background has led them or leads them, because I think we all have completely different barriers depending on what kind of marginalized situation we all come from. So I definitely would not be able to speak on that, I think, from like the lived experiences of someone who doesn't have mine. But I think for a quite a generalized one, I think maybe it is because of role models and representation. I think, you know, there are so many cisgendered, white, typically male role models out there in this nature space, and I think that it's moving in a different direction, and I think you see that slowly happening as people start to become more represented in different sorts of you know, natural history careers. There is a growing sense of, you know, acceptance and representation. I'm just thinking back to, there's a fantastic scientist called Lauren Esposito, who founded 500 Queer Scientists. And I think if anybody is not aware of 500 Queer Scientists, it's a really great platform to go onto and to put in your information so that you can literally just see so many different kinds of queer people from loads of different backgrounds and their role in science. And it really, even just being on that platform and seeing that representation in that space gives you so much confidence and makes you feel so much more, you know, able to walk into it. But Lauren, you know, she talks about being literally the only queer person in her entire lab, and she's the assistant curator of arachnology, I think, but in the States. But she talks about it so eloquently as well. But yeah, I think the main thing that I think is so important is role models, and that's why it's, you know, I'm definitely not saying everybody has to stand up and talk, because it's really hard. And following on from what Caroline was saying, you know, it's important to respect people who find it really difficult to come out. It's such a journey, and everybody has that timeline themselves for whatever they're coming out for. But I think if that capacity is there, and if you've worked towards that capacity, being able to speak about your experience only allows other people to feel safe to speak about theirs. So I think that's probably one of the greatest barriers, but also one of the ones we're currently breaking down. So yeah.
Great, thanks for that, Dan. I've got a couple of questions here for Dawn. I'm not sure whether to ask them both together, but let's start with the first one, which is from Amiyu Deshi, and the question is: have you had any challenges at the National Trust, internally and externally, around getting LGBTQ+ stories told and reshaping colonial narratives of the spaces you work in? And if the answer is that you have had challenges, how have you overcome these and communicated the importance of telling these stories?
I was going to say I could have just had a very short answer of yes on that. It's interesting, I think, particularly looking back at Prejudice and Pride, because it was such a landmark and such a big and very visible move to work with these histories, that it really was like putting a kind of a flag in the sand. And I'm sure lots of people have seen some of the very visible kind of backlash against that. I think that the organisation learnt a lot about how to kind of gain more confidence and being robust at standing up for it. I think there were some, I wasn't here at that time, so a lot of it has actually been me learning it through people's personal experiences of being at properties and volunteers. So I think there was a lot of learning about feeling more robust and confident in something that was quite new for the organisation, and that increased recognition of kind of the more personal and emotional kind of draw it can be on people. So if you are the volunteer that's, you know, hearing firsthand, literally in your face about things like this, it's strange because it's such a big organisation and there's that ambition and belief versus how it plays out in real life, and having to be aware of that wider kind of cultural and social context at the moment. So there has internally been great support for this. I'm not going to claim 100% at all times, but there's recognition of it. And I think because our strapline, forever for everyone, is that thing of, if these places are genuinely for everyone, we can recognise at the moment that in terms of the stories that are being told and in terms of who feels welcome at them, that currently isn't everyone. So this work allies with that. And as well, because we're a kind of research kind of based organisation as well, that being able to point to robust research and definition, like kind of reasons for that, and that lots of this is based on foundations of research. So similar to lots of the work recently, and again, unfortunately, I'm sure lots of people will have seen things in the press, various extreme views about us sharing some of the more colonial and more global links of our properties. Again, a lot of it is sometimes not particularly about the work, but how it can be presented or represented by other parties for their own purposes. So a lot of it is actually more the kind of trying to get the sensitivity and nuance of what you're doing, and also that I think it also links into some of the stuff about use of imagery of prides as well, actually. What's the purpose and how big do you go in terms of promoting it visually, and where do you lose the nuance and the impact that this work can have? At the same time, that building up lots of the, as I say, the research and understanding of our places, that's we have a duty to understand what we're working with, their histories, and to share that with people. But it's always that game of how is that visible and public, and what does that then kind of evolve into?
Yeah, I think you've hit on it there. One of the things you didn't say, though, that from an outsider looking in, and I'm a National Trust member, but you know, I saw the strength of the communication and also the leadership sticking with what they had decided to do in terms of this was important. It was important for the National Trust. It was important for LGBTQ+ communities. So I think there was some bravery around sticking to the guns as well of what the National Trust had decided. Slightly different question, but still for you, Dawn. So you're still in the hot seat, which is a question from Craig Dornan. I understand that most of the LGBT representation from history is predicated on privilege and standing. However, have you got a good underdog story? So have you got any examples of historical figures that were the underdog or from a working class background?
I do. Have I just muted myself? No. Okay. We do, and actually, I meant to add in that some of this work that I've been looking at more of the outdoors is what I'm finding exciting, is that greater possibility that it's not so linked to the great house and the kind of the wealthy, well-off people. That we do have snippets of stories that we've come across. So actually, ironically, there is snippets from at Sissinghurst. I'm just going to see if I can find the quote. So I think it's in 1950s, and two of the estate workers there, it's recognised that they're at kind of at risk of blackmail because of essentially the sex they're supposed to have been having together. And you actually have Vita writing to James Lees Milne, who then worked for the National Trust and was a very openly bisexual man, talking about her concerns about that threat of a police case of a criminal nature. And that idea of the associated gossip. So there was that sense of, I think, potentially a recognised kind of contradictory thing of like, well, I'm having my life, but actually because of these people and that risk of police involvement on this. So we have insights on that. And then again, there's lots of interesting things about relationships between different classes as well. And when people are working or as secretaries for people, what that relationship is or develops into. And there's a lot of that kind of playing with visibility or what's possible or what makes it possible to live closely with someone. We do have, there was a groom that worked at Cork Abbey known as Jockey John or Jockey Jack, they went by both, that on their death, unfortunately, at Nottingham workhouse, it's realised that either they were either choosing to cross-dress or potentially a kind of transgender identity. So that's the story I'm interested in looking at more, but I'm really keen to approach it with nuance. So it's not that kind of, let's grab at the unusual stories, and a story that's all based on kind of people potentially being outed against their will and things like that. So yeah, I was going to say, in terms of that more different classes, Birdla Bird, who is a kind of artist historian I've worked with a lot, she's done lots looking at kind of the occupants of the workhouses around the country. And I know that Lambeth Workhouse was apparently exposed as being much a breeding ground for unnatural passions. So we've got kind of snippets of that, but I'm really keen to kind of embed it more in and make more of the links across, and I'm hoping that kind of this more the outdoors, gardening, working on the land, and those elements are going to help do a bit more of that.
Yeah, thank you. There was something you said there about not just plucking at stories, which I think could speak to something that Dawood said earlier about tokenism. That we need to have the nuance and explore and not just go, and I think that probably points to the next question, which is for Kim and Dawood. And I'll let one of you indicate to me which one of you wants to go first. But the question is, I've noticed that EDI is increasingly becoming involved in our day-to-day work. That's amazing. I think we'd all agree with that. However, how do we foster an environment of inclusion without turning people into the demographics, without considering the human? So I think that's something about, we all have multiple facets to who we are, from the innate through to things that are outward from society and all the rest of it. So so how do we do that? How do we keep reminding ourselves of the human? And Dawood, I'll come to you first, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and one that I've kind of come across quite a lot, especially working as an engagement officer for a youth organisation in nature, and also working to kind of increase diversity in the BBC as well through various different initiatives and talk to different people. It's like you said, it can be very I think in this industry that can become quite corporate and can become quite sort of hierarchical. You do, as you said, stand almost a chance, but in a negative way, of turning people into literally cogs in a machine and literally being that very much poster child of a certain demographic, like you said. And I think the only way to view people as opposed to sort of figureheads of movements or whatever is to have more of them. And I think, especially when I'm interviewing people for articles that talk about diversity, and if I'm trying to get a certain demographic's voice on something, I cannot be talking to one person in that community. I cannot be talking to one person who I've seen shares one characteristic with that community, and therefore they are the views of that community that I'm going to listen to. I have to talk to many members of the community, and they have to share a variety of different views. And so I think whenever we deal with this, I don't think there should just be one person who's head of EDI, or there should just be one person who's head of diversity, of all diversity, of everything, because they're just not going to get it right. And what it does is, like you said, it forces everything into one cup, and it can also cause the person who's talking to become quite drained, as well as the fact that they aren't representing everyone's views. So I think, in short, the answer would be that we actually do need a lot more people working in EDI from various different backgrounds, different experiences, and with different views, because then you get that wonderful spectrum, like I've said, of experiences and views, and from that you can build upon those views. And that, I think, comes to a second thing, which is to get people who are of minority status into boardrooms and into places where actual change is made, as opposed to lots and lots of entry-level jobs, which we see a lot of now, where there is, there's significant diversity in entry-level jobs now in the nature and conservation industry, and that's fine, but that's not really going to do anything if they can't get their voices up to the top, which because unfortunately this industry does still work in a very corporate way, because that's how our society is built. So I think getting people into boardrooms and getting far more voices in terms of who you're asking about how these things work, because a lot of the time it can be the case that if you are the head of EDI and you don't have experiences that these minorities have, you just don't know, and you're trying to talk to lots of other people in your constituent about these issues, but they don't know either, and then everyone's just sort of bouncing views off everyone. It just goes in a big circle and nothing gets done. So I think, it is and it's also reaching into communities of people who aren't normally looked at. I think especially I'm going to pull on an example, which is Muslim communities that never really get talked to about nature and conservation industries, and I think that links into this issue with queer voices as well, because there are lots of people who never get asked questions about this.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I like to say is we don't all have one big queer mind where we all think alike. So strength in numbers absolutely is imperative. Also, the value of colleague networks. See what I did there? Neatly segueing to you, Kim, for your views on this question.
Am I live? There's the red button. Yes. Yeah, I echo everything that Darwood said, and that is particularly an issue in organisations that have been, very non-diverse for a very long time. I think one of the key, and actually there's a point on that, which is that obviously, I mean, taking the Starlings as an example, not every LGBT person at the Rspb is a member of Starlings. They don't have to be. It's not a requirement to be. So, are we getting a certain type of people who are part of the Starlings who want to perhaps drive more change? Whereas, are there others out there that they maybe don't feel confident being in there? Maybe they don't feel it represents them. There's all of these questions, because obviously we don't speak for everybody within the LGBT community. And I've literally just started a disability network as well. And, we know that potentially 20% of the workforce could be classed as disabled. But at the moment, there's only 10 of us in there. So, how are we representative? So it's really difficult. It's really difficult, I think, to bring in all of those voices. And particularly, as Darwood said, if you don't have it coming from the top down in terms of that representation being up there at the top and that lived experience, and when decisions are being made, that they're being made by diverse minds, then it's always just us trying to push up from the bottom with the limited views that we can do as one group. I think one of the keys is to use real people's stories where they are happy to share them, because then, you know, we hope that that takes away from the tokenism, that, you know, if there is somebody in the organisation who identifies as queer and is happy to share their stories, then we kind of feel that that helps to influence the rest of the organisation as well, because they can see, then they have that visibility. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do. But the other thing is that, I mean, I suppose this falls true with all organisations, is you've got limited channels to reach members of staff and volunteers. People's inboxes are absolutely swamped. So, you know, we're putting out intranet articles and we're doing spotlight talks, but we tend to get the same people come to the spotlight talks. They're the ones that are already bought in. You know, the intranet articles, lots of people won't see them because they're really busy, or maybe they're working on a reserve. They don't have that much computer access time. This is something that we're constantly thinking about. And actually, as we put in place this trans awareness and inclusion campaign this year, one of the things that we are thinking about is how we get over these barriers. How do we reach the people that really need to learn this stuff? You know, particularly we're thinking line managers, because a line manager may not be aware that a member of their staff that they're managing is trans. So how do we make sure that they have the knowledge and the tools and the skills, basically, in order to make sure that they are creating a trans inclusive environment? So hopefully we might get some answers into how we tackle the different, you know, barriers of channels that we have. But yes, all I can say is I just echo completely what Dawood said. We need people at the top, we need real voices, and we need lots more and more visibility. But there is something, and I mean, I'm going to be a bit like Dan. I'm just going to keep mentioning Darwood because, you know, and I know we talk about the exhaustion of the fact that this comes to one person, and I do get that. But the fact that, you know, that you were in the BBC Wildlife magazine, the BBC Wildlife magazine had an article about diversity. You know, I had that for years when I was younger. I mean, I stopped it ages ago because I never have time to read it, but I went out and bought that edition because it had your article in it. That stuff makes such a difference. It makes such a difference. And I think it's also part of the reason why there's now so much hate coming at us, is because we are more visible now, and it's just going to bring the trolls out the woodwork, unfortunately. And I really do feel sorry for, you know, my social media colleague yesterday who was dealing with all of that. And there is a question around that, is how do we support the people who are having to have that stuff come at them? Because they might not be, you know, if they're not a member of the community, they might not be expecting it coming. They might not be prepared for that kind of hatred. So for me, there's another bigger question. Sorry, I've taken us off on a tangent, but just because I'm really feeling for my colleagues, you know, yesterday, when we first started going to Pride, we put out, you know, we created an FAQ for like all of the staff, you know, who do the social media and stuff, so that they would be prepared for what came. But then when those letters started coming through, and everyone sent them to me, you know, they sent them to me because I was just like the face of us going to Pride. And this whole thing about, you know, perhaps not getting the people from that protected characteristics to deal with the hate mail. But then I was actually glad that it came to me rather than going to another one of my colleagues, because I was prepared for it and they weren't. So, you know, there is that. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot around this. I'll stop now.
No, there absolutely is, Kim. You're right there, and I think you've touched on, both of you touched on representation. I just want to bring Caroline into this with the next question, actually, because there's a question about representation in the workplace and role models for young people, and this also speaks to ensuring there are more voices and more people included. So the question is it important for role models, mentors to state if they are LGBTQ+? And Caroline, you spoke to that in what you said earlier, so I'm interested in your view.
I think it's really important, first and foremost, that people are coming out when they're comfortable coming out. I think that's really key point to get across there is, you know, if somebody is in that position and they are LGBTQ+, not forcing them to come out in the workplace because of representation, but looking for people who are willing to come out or who have already come out. They are fantastic people to be looking to for role models, for mentorships, but really it is just, you know, repeating what has been said already, is just seeing that representation is so useful. I know somebody else mentioned getting, you know, young queer people into science. Seeing that representation really does help bring people into those sectors, can make people feel a lot more comfortable. And if I had just like one lecturer who was out, maybe I would be a lot more comfortable coming out as well. But I know I certainly wouldn't want to be, you know, forced to come out in order to take on that role at university. So it's really difficult to be like, yes, we want all of this diversity, you must do it. Like, that's not an okay thing to do. So yeah, more diversity, more people talking about it, more people who are comfortable talking about it, and not putting all of that onto just like the one queer person in the lab and things like that. Yeah, it is really just reflecting what everybody else has said already.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Coming out has to be a choice. It's personal choice. Once you have come out, it never stops. You know, every interaction, every future conversation when you meet new people. I'm going to move from the workplace into the outside, and we've got a question here about how do we encourage more LGBTQI families to get out into nature and hiking. And the person who's asked the question said, we've got 2 sons and believe it helps build resilience. And of course, it's a great day out. So has anyone got particular strong views about encouraging LGBTQI families to get out into nature? Have you got some ideas about how you can share with the people on this webinar? No one's volunteering, so I might go to Darwood again.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question, in that it kind of does, it very much links into getting LGBTQI plus youth interested in nature, but also comfortable. I think comfort is the main thing we want here, and security, because I think first and foremost, above many other things that we want in life, we do just want security. And we want comfort, and we want that stability that you need as a baseline thing if you're going to go somewhere and enjoy the experience and really take away something useful. And especially with conservation and with nature, I think the main focus a lot of the time is making people who aren't normally in those spaces feel comfortable in those spaces, so they then learn more about those spaces, because you are obviously going to be more productive and happier if you are comfortable and safe. So the main thing to focus on here is making families, especially queer families, feel safer in these spaces. And I think one of the ways that I've seen that done quite well is by explaining, or being, I guess, having a lot of people there who are on the staff who are queer people anyway. Because this should be happening anyway. I think, you know, statistically, we have a lot of queer people. It's not really a case of we have to find queer people to be on the staff. We are here. It's just there aren't a lot of us on staff boards or in places where we can help out. And I think having that representation, like I said before, is so very comforting to people. I know I've gone to places before and I've seen if someone's working there that is a queer person and is very comfortable in their identity, then I'll feel so much more comfortable about just being myself in that space, and then I can just move on to learning about that space and just enjoying it for what it is. So I think having staff members who are queer people and again, like I've said, that, you know, we are here already, so it's not really a case of going, we need this and this. I think it is a case of just opening up the perspective that you have on who can work in this industry, and then you will attract those kind of voices. I think another thing which is very useful to do is, if you aren't a queer person and you don't understand the issues that a queer person has gone through, educating yourself on the issues that have occurred recently or in the past or may occur in the future. There's a lot to know about queer people. There's a lot to know about identity, and there's a lot to understand about expression, and it will help you yourself to understand your own expression, but it will also help you to understand some of the things that are making people feel uncomfortable in certain spaces. Because I find a lot of the time when you go to some people with a sort of a chunk of information and you go to tell them why people feel uncomfortable in those spaces, because they themselves have never felt uncomfortable in those spaces, they don't really understand, and they kind of feel slightly they don't need to know this because this space is already comfortable. What are you talking about? But really, just understanding the issues that a lot of people are going through will make it just such a better environment for families to come into. And I think also understanding that identity, sexuality, all of these things, they are quite different issues and they're very complex in each of their own. And that stops people from putting all of them into one space and then thinking, oh, we shouldn't be teaching children about this because it's linked to this, or this all means the same thing, therefore we shouldn't have families be talking about this or talking about this with families or children. And so by understanding that, again, through the education of yourself and therefore the education of others, you can make these spaces more comfortable. And I think the conversations that then can happen in these spaces will undoubtedly make them better spaces.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot there about safety, and maybe it speaks to the making sure curated outdoor spaces are safe as well. So something that Dawn and Kim both spoke to. Dan, you want to add something? And you're muted. Still muted.
Boom, we're in. There we go. No, I just wanted to add to that, like on that, I was thinking while you were speaking, Darwood, and talking about the people that are out there right now adding to this conversation. I just think even like finding those people where they're speaking from is really helpful. So I'm sure many of us in this space, but maybe not everyone, will know Patty Gonia, the queer environmentalist and drag. I think they refer to themselves as a drag thing, but they advocate massively for the inclusivity for all queer people in nature, and I'm obsessed with Patty Gonia. And if you don't follow Patty Gonia across their social medias, really great like beacon for getting queer people, queer families, queer kids out into nature, do loads of events. And I just wish that like maybe some people would who would walk into that space would see Patagonia and be like, okay, you're in the States, what have we got here in the UK? Yeah, I just feel like, yeah, again, going back to role models, but like brilliant for a voice to get you excited about nature, but hopefully a beacon that will begin having those kind of leaders who will take queer people out into nature and create spaces for queer people to feel confident and safe and happy outside as well. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to slightly change tack a little bit, which is about that we've got a question here from Oliver about how can we ensure efforts to enhance LGBT plus diversity and belonging in the environment sector / movement. How can we ensure that also tackles intersectional social groups like race, gender, disability? And Kim, I wondered if I could come to you to get your thoughts from both from a network perspective and a disabled person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a brilliant artist, and I have absolutely forgotten her name, and Ali's going to kill me later. I think it's Tender Rebellions, and it's this brilliant picture, and it's intersectional or not at all. And I really believe that, and I know that, I mean, the Rspb and many organisations are working a lot to certainly improve the ethnic diversity within their organisations, and that's absolutely fantastic. But I have been banging the same drum for the last year about this, was that yes, we absolutely need much greater, for example, ethnic diversity within the conservation sector. But if we are not also looking at disabled inclusion and queer inclusion and every other aspect and socioeconomic inclusion, by default you are automatically excluding those portions of the ethnic community, because nobody is one thing, as we've already discussed. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in intersectional or not at all. I really think we absolutely need to come at this with the understanding that people are very rarely one thing, and that, you know, those different intersections have different impacts on people, and it's one of the things I'm actually really excited about in terms of like the EDI program going forwards at RSPB, is because it is new. We've got this new head of EDI who is non-binary, is a disabled worker, is openly a disabled worker. So, you know, for me, that's really aspirational to see. But part of this is going to be having these working groups going forward, which all the affinity groups will be part of. So my hope is, and I hope that this happens in other organisations as well, but as they are building this new EDI programme to weave diversity and inclusion throughout everything the RSPB does, that the voices of those different affinity groups will be able to feed into that. That was actually the reason that I started the Disability Network, because we didn't have one, and I was thinking, oh, these working groups are going to be coming up, but disabled people are not going to have a voice. So, you know, it is, and the problem is, of course, there are so many cans of worms to pop the lids off for all of these different issues. And I mean, you know, socioeconomics is not even considered a protected characteristic, for example, and yet it's critical, as Darwood said, about having access to green space is a huge barrier for people. So that has also got to be considered, as well as, you know, the traditional protected characteristics that we know of in terms of, you know, inclusivity. But yeah, I mean, I'm really hopeful with the RSPB, and I'm hopeful that, you know, we can work with Wildlife and Countryside Link, and with, you know, we've already hooked up with the National Trust and Wildlife Trust. So hoping together that we can really, you know, turn this into a bit of a movement of inclusion that does keep numbers. Yeah, absolutely.
Comes back to strength in numbers. Thank you, Kim. We've only actually got 5 minutes left for this Q&A, and there are so many questions that we haven't yet got to, and there's no way we'll get to them all, so apologies if you asked a question and we don't get there. We might think about how we can look at the questions afterwards, after we've finished, and see if there's something that we can do around answering some of those. So I'm going to change this into a little bit of a quick fire. So if I can ask the questions quicker and you can answer them as quickly as possible, see how many we can get through. This next one's for Caroline. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. The question says, I found university quite a liberating experience, a space where I could be my whole self. However, when I started working in marine conservation, I couldn't find any representation. Do you think that we should have more queer mentorship in environmental sectors, and what form would that take?
I think absolutely yes. I think any way that we can have access to other queer people in those spaces is going to be a useful thing for people who are going into that sector. In terms of how, that's a really sort of difficult question to answer, because there are so many different ways that you can do it. I think just making sure, again, it comes back to that thing of representation and making sure those people are there, because if they're not there, then they can't do that mentorship, they can't help other people in that way, they can't make sure that other people are feeling safe in that environment. So it is just making sure that the right people are being asked about potentially introducing mentorship in some way, and just making sure that those people are in high enough positions to be able to implement those things. Thanks.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I've got a question here for Dan, which says, reflecting back, is there anything you could have done differently when you were subjected to homophobia? I mean, you talked about not challenging at the time and not calling it out. And the question says, I know a lot of us will have suffered similarly and want to use our experience to help others.
Absolutely. I mean, we all go through journeys with these things, and I think that the timeline that what happened with me was just the timeline that I had to go through it, you know. And I think when I I came to that realization. I'm really glad that I did, and I'm really glad that I was, you know, I had the capacity in who I was at that moment to do something about it and feel safe to do it in a public forum. Because I mean, it became a lot more public than I actually even thought that it would. I thought it was going to be one of those articles that they just shoved at the back of the paper, but it was on the front page. So I did get quite a lot of hate, and I still get quite a lot of hate. I mean, we just put a BBC Earth series out last Friday, and we've got another one coming out this Friday. And the comments on it, we were talking earlier about like in the workplace not necessarily knowing what to do with things. And I didn't think they'll have ever had those comments on BBC Earth before, because I don't think they've ever had an LGBT presenter on BBC Earth before. But there are some pretty harrowing things that people like to say on the internet. And I think for me, an answer to the question, what like I found most difficult now, which I think you know, they're not water off a duck's back for me. When I read those comments, it does actually get to me, and I hate that, but it does. And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't and act like I'm something that I'm not. Like, I don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It kind of reignites that slight element of shame that I built over years and years and years, that I'm trying and still fighting to get rid of. So I actually think that I wish when I was younger that I had found groups like the group we're sitting in right now, because actually it's being in communities like this that I can walk into that space and actually like come back and maybe, let's say that you guys are all my peers, and then that comment comes in, and right here I've got you sitting there on Zoom. I'm like, I've just got this comment, and we can all unpack it, talk about it, share our experiences, and that kind of gets rid of the blow a bit, because you've got this community around you that, you know, they're not necessarily your cisgendered like straight counterparts or whatever that go, oh my god, that's so awful, but have absolutely no understanding of what it really means. I wish I'd found more community back then, but I'm really excited to have it now. So I'm not regretful, I'm just hopeful for people who are younger to get spaces like this, and for spaces like this to grow.
Absolutely. Chair's prerogative, I'm gonna just ask one more question, even though we're out of time. And the first person on the panel to raise their hand, possibly Dawn, because you haven't spoken much, but the question is about how has being LGBTQ plus shaped the way you do your work? Do you feel LGBTQ plus people bring something different that the movement needs? I mean, other than a short yes, if you could elaborate on that, yes, that'd be great. Dawn.
I think partly going back to that thing about thinking intersectional, in terms of intersectional approaches and things, because actually so I identify as queer, but that's kind of brought me to communities of a whole variety of different people. So I'm never just thinking about my sole identity and experiences. I feel that I'm part of that community, and that, so yeah, there's that kind of idea of representation and all of us together. So I think it's that nuance, and also that understanding like the emotional and personal connections and power of some things, whether that can be from the negative side of things, but also, like I was saying, sometimes small bits of informational moments that can actually be really quite moving to particular people based on your own experiences. So yeah, I'll keep that's as short as I can summarize it.
Thank you, Dawn. I'd love to carry on this Q&A for a while, but we do have an agenda that we do need to stick to. So I just want to say thank you all for your contributions today. We're not quite finished though. We do have a couple of little bits to kind of wrap up and bring the session to a close. And Dan, I wonder if we could come to you next. You've offered to give kind of 5 minutes of reflection on what you've heard today and any take-home messages. So I'll pass to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see on everyone's faces when we talk about these subjects that it matters so much to us. And every time each of us comes to this circle, I mean, we're so different. Everybody in this panel is so different. We've all got really different lived experiences. We come from different age groups. We have gone through different things. We're yet to go through some of those same things as each other. But I think like that's what's so beautiful about the LGBTQI plus community, because it it's a massively diverse network of completely different lived experiences, as so many people, Darwood, sorry, I'm saying your name again, have said, like, Darwood, it's just the event for Darwood today. But I think it's in our different experiences and our diversity that we're able to come to problems and actually solve them really quickly, because we've got such different ways of looking at situations. And as everybody's been saying, you know, it's about coalition building, and it's about bringing people together and having people at the tops of companies making these decisions and being part of that question to get things to get to answers quicker for everybody, because it doesn't just fix things for us, it fixes things for everybody if our top level communities are diverse. But yeah, no, I'm really excited. I think it's really cool to have these kinds of things. I hope we get to have more of them. I hope we get to have some of them in person as well. And yeah, no, it's really great to be part of this. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dan. And I think we can all agree with that sentiment around hopefully being able to do some of this in person. I have to say, though, we probably, by being virtual, can reach more people in one go. But yeah, there's something about actual human connection rather than through a screen. So finally, just to close our event, I'm going to pass to James Diamond from Natural England. And James, introduce yourself, and there we go.
Thank you, Cath. Thank you so much. My name's James Diamond. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a director in Natural England. I'm a proud ally of our LGBT+ network in Natural England. And I'm also hugely privileged to have been the chair of the steering group that's pulled this event together today, and indeed last year's event as well. And I do mean hugely privileged, because I've listened to our speakers and the conversation today, and I never stop learning, and I never stop gaining insight and understanding of the challenges, the excitement that this community brings to the natural environment sector. So thank you to all of our speakers. We've been hugely privileged to have you with us today. We've been hugely privileged to have Cath as a calm and assured MC throughout the event. And thank you so much, Cath, for giving so much of your time and experience to the event today. And I also want to thank some people who you won't have seen or heard of. So John, Nick, Jamie, Sarah, another Sarah in the background, all of whom who work for Natural England, who have done so much behind the scenes today that none of you would have seen. Slightly panicked messages, pulling things together at the last moment. And I'm just going to take the chance just to, I hope you'll join me in a small round of applause to all of them, our speakers, our presenters, our technical team. Thank you so much. Those of you who are with us, you're one of about 370 odd people that registered for the event today. We're really proud of that. When we first set up Pride in Nature last year, we thought we might get about 50 people attending. So to have that level of interest and enthusiasm tells us that there's much more to do, and indeed some of our speakers have already said that, which gives me a cue to say that there's more to come. So when I finish speaking, we will put up an opportunity for people to attend an in-person event, actually, hosted by our friends at the Royal Horticultural Society in Salford in April, a Pride in Nature event at Vauxhall Gardens in Salford. So the opportunities don't stop. It may not be for everyone in terms of geography and timing, but I do hope that at least some of you who are with us today will be able to be part of that event as well. And the last thing I'll say is that our ambition doesn't stop. I suspect we'll be having a Pride in Nature 2023, and our arms are wide open for offers of support, speakers, organisations, individuals who want to make Pride in Nature 2023 even bigger and better than Pride in Nature 2022. And with that, I'll say one more thank you to everyone that's attended today, everyone that's contributed, and I'll say have a great rest of the day. Thank you very, very much.